Welcome to this lecture on the contemporary issue of ageism and inclusion. Now, in terms of setting the context, we're going to explore in this session the change in perceptions in relation to what constitutes disability and elderly. Now, the major focus of this is on elderly, but we're going to explore this through a disability lens at the start of this session, particularly around the disability model that we use in society. We're going to then consider kind of disability a little bit, and then in relation to the elderly and inclusion, and then the aspirations to influence the policy process. Now, through this, we will explore aspects such as discrimination and age discrimination, and why that's such a problem in society and for older people. So as a starting point, we'll have a look at the medical approach to defining disability, and we'll try and link this to ageism and why it's relevant to ageism, not just disability. But the medical model itself focuses on the disability and its limiting effect on the individual. So for example, if we look at the picture there, we've got a person in a wheelchair. So the medical model will focus on the disability, which means that person will be in a wheelchair. But then how that limits that person in relation to their contribution to society, or what they can or can't do, or which opportunities they can or can't take. So essentially, it problematizes the individual. It says that the problem is with the individual. So it medicalizes the issue. And this is sport. So this is kind of what we see not just in society, but what we see in sport as well. And it's really important that we try and flip this, and we try and find a way to use sport or adapt sport to support individuals. But at the moment, the system we have is we try and ask people to adapt to fit our model of sport. So in terms of the medical problem, we kind of got this 8-stage model. So as a starting point, disabled person is classified as faulty in some way. So therefore we give a diagnosis, and there's various disabilities in this model of disability that a person might be diagnosed with. From there, we then label that person or categorize them. So they have this, and there's various stigmas that are attached to that. And then we might look at how their impairment becomes a focus of attention. So we focus on their impairment more than anything else. From there, we start to assess, we start to monitor, and we start to create programs of therapy or rehabilitation, and we impose that on people based on how we've categorized them or labeled them. We segregate people with disability, sometimes into their own group, and sometimes just in a broader group, but we segregate disability, and we try to create alternative provision, alternative services that are more suited to people with disabilities or particular disabilities. So therefore, the ordinary needs of the person is put on hold because the disability needs are seen as more important. And therefore, if possible, we end up with this stage at the top. So re-entry, if the person is deemed to be normal enough, or we permanently exclude this person into their own separate category or separate group. And we can see this with ageism as well. Obviously, we're viewing this through disability at the moment, and this model is built on disability and the medical model of disability. But we can explore this through an ageism lens as well. So quite often we see older people as being faulty, and then we diagnose them, and that might link to disability because there's various things that we diagnose older people with that are categorised as disabilities. You might think about dementia, for example. But once this older person is viewed as being faulty and outside of society, we start to diagnose, we start to label. This older person might not have the same freedom, the same movement as they would have had when they were younger. And we start to focus on their impairments or what they can't do. It might not be an impairment, but what they can't do because of their age. We start to monitor. We might impose programs of therapy or rehabilitation on these people. We might segregate older people, think about care homes, or just in terms of groups, we might create groups for older people to go to in kind of community clubs. The ordinary needs of older people are put on hold because we view the needs of what because they're older as being more important. We might get to re-entry, but we probably then get to permanent exclusion, where we exclude you from normal society, and we kind of leave you in this category over here and try and support the needs of that category separately. So that's the model that we have in the UK, and it is built, as I said, on a medical model. And what we mean by medical model is this model exists because it's more efficient in a hospital, or it's more efficient in terms of looking at the medical needs of people. However, there is an alternative. We don't really use the alternative that often in the UK, but the alternative is what's called a social model. So I'm sure we've seen this picture before, but let's look at this picture on the right as a starting point. For a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. And obviously we can see there we've got various different animals, and some are going to be able to climb that tree easily, some aren't going to be able to climb it at all. We've got various differences there. Like the fish in a fishbowl, is not going to be able to do that. And we quite often look at this picture in terms of an equality or equity perspective. But if we view this in terms of kind of, how we view older people as well. So if we put the same sport provision on for everybody, are older people going to be able to take part in the same way? So if we remove that analogy of the tree or taking the exam, and the exam is climbing the tree, but actually we're looking at for a fair selection, everybody can take part in the same sporting opportunity. Please go and play football, or please go and play hockey in the same way. Then actually older people may not get the same opportunity to be able to do that. Now, in the social model, the focus is on how society disable people with impairments. And what we essentially mean by society, we're talking about like the environment and the social attitudes that people have. So it's not on the person with the disability, or in this case, it's not on the person who's older, but actually it's on society and the way we view older people, which is really the issue. So in terms of the social model of disability, within this model, actually the problems are situated in the social structure. So the emphasis is on the kind of socio or the society or the political context which we create as people, or they're created for us, and we fulfill those roles in society. But actually those social structures are the problems. So the way that we view older people, or the way that we view people, let's say broadly to start with, actually is the problem. Not necessarily that the person has a different need because of their age, but it's the way that we view people. So for example, things that we do and things that we need to try and avoid doing, we segregate people. So we overprotect people, we hide people in home, but and we do that as a family, or we leave older people with a lack of social network. So as older people are kind of craving the same socialization that people do when they're younger, but we kind of remove that from older people. We leave them at home, and we don't really take them to opportunities as a family, because we dictate that older people should stay at home. We don't allow people to have the same freedom because we're scared of the medical issues that are apparent with some older people. So we've then also got kind of segregated services. So if older people need to tap into a particular service, then it's segregated. It's not something that's for everyone, or it's not something that's built into the community that has got lots of different people accessing. It's an older person service that you go here to go and access. If we think about employment or education or facilities, then they're really inaccessible, or they're inflexible. So older people have different needs around those things. It could be timing, it could be access. In terms of making sure it's like it might be wheelchair friendly, or it's friendly for someone on a walking stick, or it's just friendly for a group of older people in terms of location. But we don't really have that in our society. Our facilities are quite inaccessible to people, but we don't really view that as a problem, because the people who take part in sport, in terms of in their 20s and 30s, typically can access these facilities. So we kind of hide that issue, because we see it as it's fine for people who do sport, because in society we don't really view older people as doing sport. We've obviously got these social prejudices. So we've got inaccessible transport, inaccessible information. A lot of sporting information now, or opportunities, is kind of fed through websites and social media that might be inaccessible to older people, who are socialized in a different way of communication. Whereas in younger generations, the socialization is through kind of online media. And that communication is through online media. We've then got kind of the stigma. So if an older person takes part in sport, then the way that they're viewed by people who see them doing it, we've got particular stigmas of sports they can and can't do, and even whether they should be doing sport, and we will think certain things. Older people, therefore, are underestimated, devalued. There's a fear about older people doing sport. We see sports as a really healthy thing and good for people, good for physical and mental well-being. But with older people, we see it as it might lead to end of life, and we're quite fearful of that. And we're quite ignorant about what older people can and can't do. We view them as not being able to do stuff. So really, if we go through those different factors, the problems with us and how we view older people, not the limitations that older people might have, looking at it through the medical model perspective. Now, if we view ageism as discrimination, I'm going to show you a quick video, and we can essentially view ageism as the new sexism. So I'm just going to pull the video across for us now, so we can play it.
We're actually into the next revolution, which is aging. And as a 71-year-old myself, I am now getting the same prejudice that I got 50 years ago as a woman. They say to older people the same thing they said to us 50 years ago as women. You're too weak, you're too fragile, you should slow down. Now the aging population is hearing that, and we're changing that.
So, to me, that's a real worry. That we've acknowledged that, well, sexism still exists in society today, but we've acknowledged that 50 years ago, the sexism society was completely unacceptable and really horrible for women. But we're starting to see now that people are starting to talk about ageism as the new sexism. So the way that we view older people is very similar to the way that society viewed women in previous generations. So a couple of really important quotes that come out in that particular short video. So they said to older people the same thing they said to us 50 years ago as women. You are too weak, you are too fragile, you should slow down. And that's quite a striking statement, that this person who's lived through the kind of stigma of being a woman 50 years ago and hearing these things, is now come back full circle and is hearing these things, not because she's a woman now 50 years later, but because she's older. And actually that's a stigmatism that we're attaching onto people. She clearly doesn't feel this way. She clearly doesn't feel too weak or too fragile, or that she should slow down. And actually it's her life to live to a degree, so, well, fully. So the fact that we're imposing these views on older people kind of links to that medical model that we spoke about earlier. Even for people with a disability, are there parallels here with the medical model of disability? I think there is. And even if we're talking about older people with or without a disability, I think some of the stuff that we've heard in that video links to that medical model of disability. Now, we do, in society, we do also have to recognise that we've got an ageing population. This is from Northern Ireland, but if we look at any of the home countries, and more broadly countries across Europe as well, or the world, we will see that a number of countries are facing this change of the future population in terms of getting older and older. And there's reasons for that. Essentially, people are living longer. People are healthier in older age. So if you think back generations before, people died younger, and when people got into these older brackets, they were unhealthier and more likely to die. Whereas now, we because of the medical advances we made, because of the social advances we've made in society, people are living longer. People are living into older years. So there are some economical issues with that because people are of retirement in these ages. But from a life perspective and from a sport perspective, it's great that people are able to live longer. But also it's something we need to consider from a sporting perspective, because now there are an increased number of people in our society, in our population, from older age brackets. And therefore, there's something that we can do with these people from a sport perspective, in terms of tapping into a market from a commercial perspective, but also just from a well-being perspective, both physical and mental well-being perspective, and a social perspective as well. We spoke earlier about older people potentially being segregated and not having the same social structures that young people have. But we can achieve some of that through sport and through physical activity for older people. Now, in terms of the legislation, people are covered in this workplace by the Equality Act of 2010 if they are directly or indirectly discriminated against or harassed because of their age. We've also got the Commission for Equality and Human Rights, which view age as a characteristic to protect, and this kind of argues against and legislates against discrimination on the basis of age, but also recognises that is a particular issue. And in the workplace, we can see things like if an older person is made redundant because they're older, not because of a skill set or a contribution to an organisation, but just because of their age, or if someone doesn't get a job because of their age, or if we don't make adjustments to people because of their age. So if we if an older person, for example, has a particular need, and as an employer we're not supporting that need, we're just asking them to do the same job that we're asking younger people to do, but in the same way, and an older person isn't able to do that, for example, we're not making a small change to support their needs so they can do the job effectively. We're discriminating against those people on the basis of age. So yeah, those who are, even though we've got this legislation, those who are considered elderly experience some of the lowest levels of activity and therefore health. And does sport do all that it can to engage those from these older target groups? And I would certainly argue sport doesn't. So do those considered elderly also experience other issues like health conditions? And therefore, there's double discrimination at play here. If we're saying sport or physical activity is useful for people's health, and it's useful for rehabilitation against health conditions, or if it's useful for offsetting health conditions, actually, if older people are more likely to experience these conditions and also are less likely to be given the opportunity to do sport, then we've potentially got double discrimination at play here, or double negative, particularly as an issue for elderly people. Now, ageism itself is an attitude of mind, and that leads to age discrimination. So the attitude that we have in our mind, the belief that we have about elderly people, that leads to age discrimination, and there are actions and outcomes that can be observed. There are things that we can see or witness or do, and they lead to particular outcomes that we can see. So direct age discrimination is unjustifiably different treatment of individuals with the same needs on the basis of age. So we can directly do that, or we can directly see that, or directly experience that, and that's unjustifiable. We're treating individuals differently, even though they have the same needs, but we're treating them differently because of their age. And then we've got, and also we're talking a lot about elderly people here, but with ageism, we also can look at young people with this. So younger people, if we think about employment, typically less likely sport, but still can happen, might be treated differently, even though they've got the same needs because they're younger, for example. That's direct age discrimination. And then we've got indirect age discrimination. So we've got equal treatment of individuals of different ages with different needs, so that those with particular needs are disadvantaged. And we spoke about this in terms of equality or equity. So equality is giving everyone the same treatment. But actually, if people have different needs, or if people are already advantaged or disadvantaged, giving everyone the same treatment just means that people who are already advantaged stay advantaged, and people who are already disadvantaged stay disadvantaged. Equity is about giving people who are more disadvantaged additional resources so they can have an additional opportunity and start to level that playing field, or get the same opportunity. So if we're focused on equality, that's an indirect age discrimination. And then we've got age differentiated behaviour, so appropriate and thoughtful action based on a recognition of age differences. We can obviously view that differently to how we viewed the 4 bullet points above. So what is ageism? Well, a term coined by Butler in 1969, ageism reflects a deep-seated uneasiness on the part of young and middle-aged, a personal revulsion and distaste for growing old, disease, disability, and fear of powerlessness, uselessness, and death. And it's something for you to reflect upon as you read that and hear that. Do you have that uneasiness about growing old? Are you scared of growing old? And actually, that uneasiness that we have, that deep-rooted uneasiness, that fear that we have about growing old and becoming powerless and useless, and and then having diseases or conditions, and then eventually dying. It's quite an uneasy feeling, and that deep-rooted feeling might lead to the way that we behave and think about elderly people. Therefore, we've got age discrimination, and institutionally, that's where it's written into policy. Institutionally, kind of, we have, even though we've had the Equality Act for a significant number of time, there are still examples where institutions written into their policy accidentally have age discrimination. And obviously that leads to a whole host of problems because people behave based on policy. So not only do we have it written into policy, but then that enshrines the whole organisation and what they do. But then we've also got issues for the institution once that's kind of uncovered in terms of kind of being sued and stuff like that. But we then got age discrimination from an individual perspective. So that's resulting from ageist attitudes and attitudes about elderly or younger people. So we've got 2 different types of age discrimination. Not only do we need to think about this in terms of the institution and individual, but we need to think about how overt or covert age discrimination might be. So overt is where it's open, is explicit, is visible. We can see that age discrimination is taking place straight away. We can see it on the surface. We can see it in people's actions. Covert is slightly different. That's hidden. That's more to do with our subconscious attitudes. So we might not share them openly. It might not impact our practice visibly or obviously or directly, or our discussions or conversations. But because we have these deep-rooted beliefs, in particular moments, we will accidentally act in an ageist way because of those deep-rooted beliefs that we have. And that's where kind of our subconscious attitude, subconscious meaning like we don't think about that consciously, it's just deep-rooted within us, and it's quite hidden. Those attitudes might lead to age discrimination accidentally. And then if we think about the characteristics of the new ageism, so stereotypes the elderly in terms of those kind of older people who are the least capable, the least healthy, and the least alert. So when we view when we view elderly people, we quite often look to that stereotype at the most extreme examples of elderly people who are least capable, least healthy, least alert. And therefore we stereotype all elderly people within that more extreme bracket. Quite often perceive older people as relatively helpless, dependent individuals requiring support services of agencies and other organisations. And ageism is a form of bigotry, like sexism, like racism. but we don't view it in society necessarily the same way. But it is the same in terms of that form of bigotry. So the message of New Ageism seems to be that we understand how badly you are being treated. You are poor, lonely, weak, incompetent, ineffectual, and no longer terribly bright. And we are going to relieve your suffering from ageism. And there's shades of the medical model there in respect of we view older people through this medical lens, and therefore we problematize the individual in terms of you're the problem, you're poor, you're lonely, you're weak, etc. And we as a society or as a person, we're going to do something about that because you're the problem. Rather than flipping that round in the social model and saying actually our views are the problem, we're viewing the individual, the elderly person as the problem. But if we view elite sport differently, we might view elderly people differently to a degree. So let's look at this is the 2008 US Olympic athletes age. So this isn't necessarily broadly across all of the Olympics or across all of elite sport, but obviously the US won or finished first in the Olympic medal table in 2008. So it's a useful table to look at. So if we look at the maximum age, the minimum age, and then the kind of average age across these various sports, and we can see some people that we would classify as elderly in the sports terms taking part in the Olympic Games, attempting to win gold medals for Team USA. So if we look at sailing, we've got 58-year-olds. If we look at shooting, 56. We look at equestrian, 54. These are people that we would view as being very old for sport, let alone for elite sport. And if we look at the mean age, we can go as high in equestrian as 42 years old. The youngest person was 30. And in sports sense, we view that as being quite old. But that was the youngest person of 14 in equestrian. So we've got a very high average age. And then we can look at it from the other perspective. Elite sport is kind of for people in their 20s. But actually, if we look at gymnastics, diving, swimming, we've got 15, 16-year-olds. And if we look at the mean age in some of these sports, 20 as an average across 19 athletes. The average age is 20 or 21 or 23. So this conceptualization that we have that people who do elite sport are in their 20s actually is wrong. People in their 50s, close to 60 in this case, people in their 50s do elite sport. People in their teens do elite sport. And even if we look more broadly than just people in their 20s, look, we've got people in their 30s, we've got people in their 40s. So elite sport is participated in by people, in this case, in the Team USA, at the pinnacle of elite sport, from 15 all the way through to 58 across these sports. So that hopefully that will change our perception of who does elite sport. And if that changes our perception of who does elite sport, that should change our perceptions of who does sport. So ageism can generate and reinforce fear. It can lead to stereotypes or stereotyping assumptions regarding what people can do and how people need to be protected. And the consequences of that range from well-meaning, we think we're trying to be good people and to mean well, but we kind of patronage and we have this unambiguous vilification of older people. So it may not be, it may not come from a bad place. It may be well-meaning from us as people, but the way that that's viewed on the other side of that, in terms of an elderly person, actually may not be the same as our intention. So what we're going to do is have a quick look at this video look at it's titled "The Amazing Skill of This Grandpa." So let's have a look, but look at everyone's actions near the start of the video and then watch the video through more broadly from there. The video is quite humorous in his own way, but think about how people reacted at the start of that. So the looks that people were given to the older person, they didn't want this person to join in. I think one person even went up to him to ask him to leave. So that, the vilification, the way that we view older people within sport. And obviously the video is about older people can contribute to sport. And we've seen the actions of that kind of later on through the video. But the starting point, we had these stereotypes that without even seeing this person play football before, we've stereotyped this person just because of their age and assumed they wouldn't be able to join in or play. Now, people who are ageist kind of avoid older people on an individual level, discriminate against older people in terms of jobs and utilisation of social institutions, deride older people through hostile humour, and complain that older people are a drain on society, that they are just taking, not giving. And these views come to light in a number of people, but these are discriminatory views and discriminatory behaviours based on age, so therefore it's an ageist issue. Now, the theoretical foundations for ageism come from a fear of death in Western society. So death and old age are considered synonymous in American society, and therefore it's something we're fearful of, that we don't like the thought of. There's also an unrelenting emphasis on youth culture. Young people kind of change the culture as generations come through. The culture shifts in society, and there's this unrelenting emphasis on that youth culture for young people. There's an American emphasis on productivity, and that's usually narrowly defined in terms of economic potential, which therefore goes against elderly people stereotypically. And the manner in which Asian people was originally researched is also a foundation for ageism, in particular that kind of medical view and that stereotypical view of elderly people and people who are aging. Now, in the lead up to the introduction of the Equality Act in 2010, we had this review, and that review was of how local authorities and the NHS can tackle age discrimination. And the Department of Health commissioned the Centre for Policy on Ageing to carry out 4 reviews of age discrimination. And the Centre for Policy on Ageing are what's known as the CPA. So these are the CPA reviews of age discrimination pre-2010. So we've got primary and community healthcare, we've got secondary healthcare, mental health care, and social care. And following an earlier review of the likely costs and benefits to health and social care, of age discrimination legislation and how to measure age discrimination. So if these are if these are places where discrimination happen or occur, but also places where we need to kind of resolve that, and places where elderly people are likely or services that elderly people are likely to use. What we can do from a sports perspective is think about how we can use sport or physical activity to support these different services. And sport can be a really useful source for that community healthcare, probably more for secondary healthcare in terms of the activity and rehabilitation or offsetting diseases through inactivity. But also in terms of that mental health care and social care, that socialisation of people together, the kind of stimulation mentally and emotionally that you might get by playing sport or taking part in physical activity. So we can see sport as a way of reducing age discrimination in some of these facets. Now, some key findings from the review. If we look at this particular quote, the thing was, I went to this service for several years, on and off, and then to my horror, I discovered that at 65, they no longer take people because it's not for pensioners. I don't know what service this was, but we can definitely see this through a sporting lens, where a person might go and take part in an activity ongoing for years and years and years, but as soon as they get to a particular age, we no longer want you here. It's not for you. Maybe not. It's not for pensioners, because actually the 65 bit might be much lower. It might be when you reach 35 or 40. But this is no longer for you. We don't want you at this sports club, and that's kind of an ageist belief, and it's age discrimination. But it happens. Elderly people lose opportunities to services or opportunities because of their age. So how do we combat that downward spiral? Well, we need to realise that older people are part of the cycle of life. They should not be compartmentalised into this undifferentiated blob. You are over here, you are this category of person, but actually we need to recognise that elderly people are all unique and different, and they're not just a category. Because when we view elderly people as categories, we spoke about earlier, we often view elderly people as the extreme version of the category, the most unhealthy, etc. We need to focus on health promotion goals as part of healthy aging. So people age, we're all aging all of the time. We need to think about how we can promote the goals of health and taking part in activity as part of that aging process, in terms of slowing down that aging process, not chronologically, but in terms of the conditions or the issues that come with aging. We can offset some of that through improving people's activity in life, and therefore promoting kind of health goals through sport and physical activity. So that's kind of, I just want to leave us there. That's kind of the end of the lecture. There might be other things you can think of in terms of combating that downward spiral. But I think if you're going to take kind of one key, well, there's lots to take from this lecture, but if you're going to take one key thing to think about, are you ageist? Even if it's accidentally, do you have this view of elderly people which might be deep rooted because of this fear of dying or fear of getting old ourselves? But are we ageist even if it's in a covert way? And then if people are elderly, who are they the problem? Are their limitations the problem, e.g. the medical model? Or are we the problem in terms of how we view elderly people, e.g. the social model?